When Might and Magic 10 Legacy was first announced, I was pretty hyped. I loved the OG Might and Magic franchise a lot, having been introduced to the franchise via Might and Magic 6 and Heroes of Might and Magic 2. So when Ubisoft rescued the franchise and released Heroes 5, and then they released Might and Magic 10 Legacy. So I started playing in 2014. And the bug was buggy back then, but it was mostly fine. There was one part where the bug was so bad I had to make actually a video on how to get around it. But, otherwise it was fine. But as I'm wanting to do, I kind of stopped playing. Things got busy and I just never came back to it. Then in 2020, I decided, you know what? I want to play the game. I'm on Twitch now, do some streaming. It might be a little bit of fun. But man, the years did not do this game any favors. Now, as an aside, I must say that because this review is from when I was playing in 2020, Ubisoft had not inserted all of its third-party rubbish into the game. So take that into account when I give you the review of the game. Back then, you could just play it on Steam, and that was it. You didn't have to have a third-party loader or anything. Now, as to the story of Might and Magic 10, it is rather forgettable. Your party comes to Sorpegal, and not the one from Might and Magic 6, to bury your late master. Your party gets caught up in local events, and, well, one thing leads to another, which, after hours and hours, leads to the final irritating boss. I should say days and days, not hours and hours. That's literally all I can remember about the story, even after watching some of my old content videos. One of the things I liked about Might and Magic 10 was the strategic gameplay. Now, granted, I went with the recommended party setup. 2 mages to cover the elemental schools, 2 warriors to have a sword and axe player for the relics. This makes the game a lot easier. Not that it means much. This game is very difficult, even on the so-called easy setting. And that's because most areas, both out in the world and inside a dungeon, are grid-based labyrinths. Combat was about getting into a place where enemies could only come at you from one direction if you were lucky. Otherwise, you just had to mitigate circumstances and try to do the best you can. And unfortunately, this is the only thing I really liked about the game. And even that aspect is tainted. While I may have liked the strategic combat, I hated the combat encounters themselves. For a start, the moment your party enters combat, you are locked, and you don't have a choice in that. It is a grid you step on, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. You can run all over the map once you're engaged in combat, but you cannot disengage from the said combat. That means if you're in a dungeon, you can't leave the dungeon. If you're in the world, you can't teleport away with a spell, even though you should be able to. You cannot enter the town from the world, even though you should be able to. So if you accidentally trigger a monster who was too tough, or if you got a role-playing ambush that you couldn't defeat, you die. And I hated it. Which brings me to another aspect that I hated. The ambushes. So imagine you're walking into an empty room. And you stare up on a square, and suddenly the room is full of, well, insert whatever opponents you want here. It wasn't that they were teleported in, no. It was more like the developers just decided you needed to fight if you stepped on a certain grid location. Much of the time, these triggers would create massively unfair fights where you get pounded from all sides instantly, and I hated that. Finally, the final boss sucked, and I am not kidding. My final episode of the video series is nothing but the boss fight, and it's 3 hours at least. So that goes to tell you how idiotic it was. One of the combat rules in the game is that if an opponent is on a grid next to you, neither of you can move. You have to fight. But in the boss fight, the boss can move whenever and wherever the boss wanted to, and you had to fight the boss. But the game would complain when you were fighting the boss because it would say, oh, well, we gotta find a new way to do this. This is not gonna kill him. Even though you'd kill him, he would just teleport away and then come back with fresh health in a few minutes, or less than that, actually. So it was really irritating on all fronts, and I hated it. Now, on to a new area that I really hated, and that was the graphics and stuff. When Might and Magic 10 came out in 2014, the graphics looked fine and the sounds were fine, despite having, some bugs in the game. It looked okay. For what the game was, it was fine. It was not flashy. It was not trying to be what it was not trying to be. It was just, here's a grid-based game. Here's some three-dimensional or two-dimensional assets that look 3D. You move around in a grid, whatever. But they look fine. However, by 2020, the graphics are all broken in the game. Thus, many of the enemies have this shiny Star Trek transporter effect on them. And I don't even know how that's possible. I have a lot of old games in my collection, and they still play, and they still look the same way they did back in the day. Sure, some of these games may be more pixelated due to the resolutions for OG games, but it's not the same as the graphics failure here. And apparently the only way that you can fix this is to go back to an obsolete graphics driver, and that's insane. But that goes to show you how poorly this game was built. If graphic drivers updating breaks your video graphics, there's a problem in how this game was developed, and I hated it. As to the audio aspects were trash too. Sometimes the dialogue would be muffled and you couldn't hear it. Sometimes incidental music would become so insanely loud, or would just keep going on and on and on, like combat music. It was especially noticeable at the end because you're constantly in combat over and over and over. You would get little respites, but the combat music would continue to play, or there would be multiple versions of it playing, and you'd have to actually exit the game, come back in just to get it to reset. Very irritating. And the sound effects were also had a lot of bad problems. Sometimes they were very loud. Sometimes you couldn't hear them. And then another aspect of the audio that was trash was a lot of times it sounded like it came from a toilet. I mean, that's just nuts that a game falls apart on all these fronts. I've never experienced any other game that did this. Another aspect of the game that I like is puzzles, and the developers of Might and Magic 10 were obsessed with them, and that drove me nuts. It could be something simple like you're in a castle, and it's someone's supposed to be, from a role-playing perspective, someone's living quarters. And you have to go to the west wing of the castle to open up a door in the east wing of the castle. Hey, that's cool, isn't it? I mean, that's puzzle. I mean, that's awesome, right? No, it makes no sense. I mean, a lot of games have little mini puzzles. I mean, I'm playing, as I record this, I'm playing Oblivion Remastered, and yeah, sometimes you have to go find where the trigger is to go open up a door, especially in the Aryan ruins. But it's not like, oh, okay, I gotta go to section 3, press a trigger, and then go back up to section 1, and then that will open up a door to do something. There have been a couple little tricky ones, not gonna lie, but nothing that triggered my rage meter. This game, however, it was a lot of stupid things like this to open up a door. The lever or whatever to open up the door would not be in a place that made any kind of sense other than, hey, it's a puzzle. We like puzzles. Don't you like puzzles? Oh, that's so awesome, puzzles. No, they're not awesome. But the puzzles don't stop there. There were various crypts throughout the game with some insane puzzles. Now, you want to do these puzzles because that's where all the legendary items are at. And you definitely want the legendary items because, they'll really make your life a lot better as you're going through the game. Now, I don't know how people solve these puzzles without blowing their brains out, though, because they don't make any sense. Most of them are just kind of dumb trial. There's nothing to tell you what to do. It's just like, okay, well, you just got to kind of figure it out. And so I ended up going with a cheat guide, because it's like I don't feel like wasting my time doing some inane puzzle to step on grids in a certain order to open up the secret location to get whatever artifact it was. And that was just one kind of puzzle. There were many others. I mean, every one was a different kind. It could be, traveling around the labyrinth within the crypt to get certain things in a certain way, or to move things around or whatever. It was just nuts. It drove me nuts. Also, throughout the world, there's a lot of trash riddles that need to be solved. Get past certain areas or to unlock certain chests. Those irritated me. And then, of course, the map itself is a labyrinth puzzle, to be honest. Now, it's not noticeable early on because you've got these fairly wide open areas. And so when you're grid clearing, meaning you're stepping on every grid on the map to make sure there's not a treasure piece there or a monster trigger there or something, it is fairly wide open. But once you get toward mid-game and especially in late game, the game is basically turns into a puzzle on the world, on the maps, the dungeons, everything. And it's just kind of irritating. I hate that. Now, it's not that the labyrinth parts on the world map are difficult or anything. I'm not saying that. It's just irritating because it means you got to travel around in bizarro, time-wasting manners that I just don't feel like doing. And I hated doing it. And so it became tedious. And even when you had the town portal spell to bail you out to a town, well, unfortunately, you can only go to one town with it, and you have to set that anchor. But then there's no way to get back to where you were, so you have to go through all the tedium of all the stuff, though. Now, I could rant on and on about how bad the game is. Even with a small budget, the game could have been good, and I'm talking about even into 2014 level. But it is filled with bugs galore, and those bugs have gotten worse over time because of the graphics and audio stuff, including optional places that cannot even be accessed due to bugs. And then, of course, now, at least as people have told me, Ubisoft requires you to use their launcher to play the game, whereas when I got back into the game in 2020, I didn't have that as an issue to deal with. So there you have it. There's my rant on the Might and Magic 10 Legacy game, a game that I wanted to like so badly, and I put right under 200 hours, 199.3 hours I put into this game. And you can watch the whole series on my channel if you want, especially toward the end. You might get some amusement out of me getting enraged and all that other stuff. But that aside, hope you liked the video. If you do, like, subscribe, and all that other stuff. We'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.